Sit down. Nobody wants to look at a broke janitor while they eat lunch. Marcus Reeves does not sit down. He sets his mop against the wall, wipes his hands on his gray uniform pants, and walks straight toward the old man, shaking near the vending machines on the 40th floor of Whitfield Tower. The old man's name is Walter Higgins, though nobody in the building knows that yet. He is 81 years old. His coat is thin. His shoes are cracked at the seams. He has been standing in the employee break room for 6 minutes, staring at a sandwich machine he cannot afford, while 3 executives in tailored suits scroll their phones and pretend not to see him. Marcus reaches into his own lunch bag, pulls out the turkey sandwich his daughter helped him make that morning, and hands it to a stranger he has never met. It is 12:41 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in March. It is the single most expensive sandwich Marcus Reeves has ever given away, because it is the only food he has until his next paycheck on Friday. 41 floors above him, in an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta, a man worth $11 billion watches the whole thing happen on a security monitor, and something in his chest goes very, very still. Marcus Deshaun Reeves is 34 years old. He stands 6 feet tall, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples years before it should, and a scar above his left eyebrow from a construction accident he survived 9 years ago. He wears a gray uniform with the name tag M. Reeves pinned crooked over his heart, because the pin has been broken since November, and he has not had $11 to replace it. He works as a night shift janitor for Whitfield Global Enterprises, a financial technology corporation that occupies the top 18 floors of the 52-story glass tower at 1100 Peachtree Street. He earns $13.50 an hour. He clocks in at 4 in the afternoon and clocks out at 1 in the morning 6 nights a week, because the overtime is the only thing standing between him and losing the apartment where he raises his daughter alone. Her name is Zoe Reeves. She is 7 years old, with 2 missing front teeth and her mother's exact laugh. Marcus's wife, Alicia Reeves, died 2 years ago from an aggressive form of ovarian cancer that the doctors caught 11 weeks too late. Marcus buried his wife on a Thursday and returned to work the following Monday because rent was due on the 1st and grief does not pay landlords. Since then, it has been Marcus and Zoe against every bill that arrives in the mailbox. He has missed her school plays because his shift starts at 4. He has eaten cereal for dinner so she could have the last of the milk. He keeps a photograph of Alicia taped inside his locker at the tower, and some nights, alone on the 40th floor at 2 in the morning, he talks to it the way other men talk to God. His dream is small and specific. He wants to save $4,000. So he can move Zoe out of the apartment above the laundromat, where the pipes bang all night, and the landlord, a man named Curtis Boone, has twice threatened to change the locks over late rent. He wants, more than anything else in the world, to walk into Zoe's 3rd grade graduation someday, not as the janitor who could not afford a decent shirt, but as a father who kept his promises. That Tuesday morning had begun like most others. Zoe spilled orange juice on her homework and cried about it until Marcus promised to write her teacher a note. He made 2 sandwiches at 6:15 a.m., one for Zoe's lunchbox and one for his own, because sandwiches were cheap and filling and did not require a stove he did not have time to use. He walked her the 4 blocks to Fulton Elementary, kissed the top of her head, and told her the same thing he told her every single morning. "You are a Reeves," he said. "Reeves people work hard and Reeves people are kind." "Do both today." "Yes, Daddy," she said, and ran through the gate with her backpack bouncing. Marcus arrived at Whitfield Tower 40 minutes before his shift, as he always did, and sat in the break room reading a library book on business management, because somewhere underneath the exhaustion, he still believed a better life was possible if he prepared for it. The man who entered his life that Tuesday, though Marcus did not know it yet, was Gregory Voss, the director of facilities operations for Whitfield Tower. Voss was 46 years old, with silver hair combed into a hard part and a habit of speaking to janitorial staff without ever making eye contact. He had run the facilities department for 11 years and treated it like a small kingdom, one where cleaning staff existed to be seen only in the moments he needed to blame someone. Voss entered the break room at 12:38 that afternoon, 3 minutes before Walter Higgins wandered in off the street through a service entrance someone had forgotten to lock, looking for warmth, and, if he was honest with himself, looking for a reason to believe the city still had a place for a man like him in it. The next several minutes would end Marcus Reeves's employment at Whitfield Tower. They would also become the reason his entire life changed. The old man stood by the vending machine with 2 crumpled dollar bills in his palm, staring at a sandwich that cost $6.50. His hands trembled from the cold, and from something that looked, to anyone who bothered to notice, like shame. 3 junior analysts sat at a nearby table, phones out, laughing at something on a screen, close enough to help and far enough to pretend they had not seen him. "Sir," Marcus said, "you don't have to stand there like that. Come sit." Walter Higgins looked up, startled that anyone had spoken to him at all. "I was told employees only," he said quietly. "I'll go." "You're not going anywhere hungry." Marcus pulled out the chair across from him and reached into his lunch bag before the old man could argue. He set the turkey sandwich on the table, along with the small bag of pretzels Zoe had packed for herself, and insisted her father take instead. "Eat this. It's good. My daughter made it. I can't take a man's lunch. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. There's a difference." Marcus slid a bottle of water across the table. "Drink something too. You look like you walked a long way." Walter's eyes filled before he could stop them. "Nobody has looked at me like a person in 3 days," he said. "Then those people have a problem, not you." Marcus glanced toward the analysts, who had finally lowered their phones and were watching now with a particular discomfort of people realizing they had been caught doing nothing. "Everybody in this room could have done what I just did. Cost them nothing but a sandwich they weren't going to eat till 2 anyway." That was when Gregory Voss's voice cut across the room like a blade drawn from a sheath. "Reeves, my office, now." Marcus stood immediately, the instinct of a man who had learned that hesitation cost jobs. "I'll be right there." "Now means now," Voss said. "And get that man out of my building before security has to." Walter Higgins began to rise, apologizing before anyone asked him to. Marcus put a hand gently on his shoulder. "Finish eating first." "Nobody's gonna make you leave hungry while I'm standing here, Reeves," Voss said again, sharper. Marcus followed him out, but not before he caught Walter Higgins looking at him the way a drowning man looks at the one hand reaching down through the water, which is to say, like it was the only true thing he had seen all week. Voss's office sat behind the loading dock, cramped and windowless, with a desk covered in maintenance logs, and a framed photo of Voss shaking hands with a regional manager nobody important remembered. He did not offer Marcus a seat. "You let a vagrant into a secured employee space," Voss said. "He came in through the service door. It was unlocked. I didn't invite him. But once he was standing there hungry, I wasn't going to throw him back out into the cold." "That's not your call to make." "Whose call is it then?" "To decide who eats and who doesn't." Voss's jaw tightened. "You gave away company food. It was my food, bought with my money. You're on the clock. You're paid to clean floors 39 through 41, not to run a charity out of the break room while paying customers upstairs are wondering why the 40th floor smells like burnt coffee because nobody emptied the machine." Marcus said nothing for a moment, because there was truth buried somewhere in the accusation, and he wanted to be fair even to a man who was not being fair to him. "I was 3 minutes off my route," he said finally. "I'll make it up on my break. You embarrassed this building in front of 3 analysts from the coal account team. I fed a hungry man a sandwich. You made a scene." "The only scene," Marcus said, his voice low and steady, "was a room full of people with money watching an old man shake from hunger and deciding it wasn't their problem. I just happened to be the one person in there who decided it was mine." Voss's face reddened. He was not a man accustomed to being corrected by someone who earned a third of his salary. "I've warned you before about the union talk, the sermonizing. Consider this a formal write-up. One more incident, Reeves, and you're done here." "Understood," Marcus said, and walked out before his anger could do what his patience had been holding back for 2 years. He did not know that 11 floors above him, in a corner office with a private elevator and a view that stretched all the way to the airport, Richard Whitfield had just replayed the security footage for the 4th time. Richard Whitfield was 59 years old, the founder and chief executive officer of Whitfield Global Enterprises, and one of the wealthiest men in the state of Georgia. His personal fortune, according to the most recent business publication ranking, stood at $11.2 billion. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Marcus earned in 4 months, and he had not personally reviewed a piece of security footage in over a year, until his assistant, a sharp woman named Denise Okafor, walked into his office holding her tablet like it contained something urgent. "You need to see this," she said, and pressed play. Richard watched a janitor give away his lunch to a homeless man nobody else in the room would look at. He watched the man's hand rest gently on the old man's shoulder, the exact way a father steadies a frightened child. He watched, 3 minutes later, the same janitor get pulled aside and dressed down by Gregory Voss, whose voice was not audible, but whose posture told the whole story anyway. Richard Whitfield sat very still for a long moment, because the man on the screen giving away food to a hungry stranger reminded him, with an ache he had buried for 4 decades, of his own father, a man named Thomas Whitfield, who had once been exactly that hungry and exactly that invisible in a city that had refused to look at him either. "Find out his name," Richard said quietly. "Marcus Reeves," Denise answered. "Night janitor, 2 years with the company. Employee files clean. No complaints on record until an hour ago when Voss filed a written warning. Get me everything on Voss's department. Complaints, turnover numbers, disciplinary records for the last 3 years. Today, yes, sir." Denise paused at the door. "Sir, who was the old man?" Richard did not answer for a long moment. On the monitor, frozen mid-frame, an 81-year-old stranger sat holding half a sandwich like it was the first kindness anyone had shown him in years. "I don't know yet," Richard said, "but I intend to find out." What Richard Whitfield could not have known in that moment was that the old man's name was Walter Higgins, and that Walter Higgins had, 40 years earlier, loaned a desperate 22-year-old immigrant welder named Thomas Whitfield $800 to keep a small metal fabrication shop from closing, a loan that had never been repaid because Walter Higgins vanished from the city before Thomas could find him again, a debt that Thomas Whitfield carried in his conscience for the rest of his life and spoke of, on his deathbed, to his only son. Richard Whitfield had spent 11 years and considerable resources searching, on and off, for a man named Walter Higgins who might or might not still be alive. In order to settle a debt his father never got the chance to close. He had never found him. He had almost stopped looking. He did not yet know that Walter Higgins was sitting, at that very moment, in the break room of his own building, having just been fed by the one employee kind enough to notice him. Downstairs, Marcus returned to his cart and pushed it toward the 40th floor restrooms, his write-up folded in his back pocket like a verdict. He thought about Zoe. He thought about rent, due in 6 days, and the $430 sitting in his account against the $890 he owed. He thought about how tired a man could get doing the right thing in a building full of people who called it a scene. He did not think, not for 1 second, that anything about that Tuesday would change the direction of his entire life, which was exactly the kind of thing a man like Marcus Reeves never had the luxury of expecting. 3 days pass before the second humiliation arrives, and it arrives at Fulton Elementary, in front of Zoe. Marcus takes his one Saturday morning off in a month to attend the school's father-daughter reading breakfast, an event he has missed for 2 straight years because of his schedule. He wears his only collared shirt, presses it himself on a towel because he does not own an iron, and walks Zoe through the gymnasium doors at 8:57 in the morning, 3 minutes before the program begins. A woman named Deborah Kessler, the PTA coordinator, stops him at the sign-in table. She is 61, wears a cardigan with an embroidered apple on the pocket, and looks at Marcus's shirt, his shoes, the crease still visible from where he pressed them with a hot towel, longer than she needs to. This event has a suggested $10 donation for materials, she says. I wasn't told that when I RSVP'd, it's on the flyer. Marcus does not have $10 to spare that is not already accounted for. He has $480 in his account and rent due in 3 days. He reaches into his wallet anyway, because Zoe is standing beside him in her only nice dress, holding a book she picked out herself, and he will not let a $10 donation be the reason she does not get to read with her father in front of her class. He hands over a crumpled $10 bill, the last cash he has on him, and Deborah Kessler takes it without a word of thanks, marking his name on a clipboard with a small, satisfied checkmark, as though she has won something. Inside, the room is full of fathers in suits and polos, men who work downtown and drive cars that do not rattle at stoplights. Marcus finds a seat with Zoe at a table near the back. A woman he does not know leans toward her husband and says, not quite quietly enough, I didn't realize they let the maintenance staff bring their kids to these things. Zoe does not hear it. Marcus does. He keeps his face still and opens the book with his daughter, because 7-year-olds deserve fathers who do not let the room's cruelty become their own. Halfway through the reading hour, Zoe's teacher, a young woman named Miss Alvarez, stops by their table and crouches down to Zoe's eye level. Your dad works so hard for you, she says, loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear, in a tone that is meant kindly, but lands like a spotlight on exactly the thing Zoe has never once felt ashamed of until that moment. Zoe looks down at her book. Marcus feels something in his chest crack quietly, the particular pain of watching your child learn, one small comment at a time, that the world has already decided what her family is worth. That night, after Zoe falls asleep, Marcus sits at the kitchen table with a stack of bills spread in front of him like a losing hand of cards. Rent, $890, due in 2 days. Electric bill, $141, past due. Zoe's asthma medication, $38, no refills left on the current prescription. He has $470 in his checking account, and a payday 6 days away. He does the math 4 times, hoping it will change. It never does. The following Monday brings the third humiliation, and this one costs him almost everything. Marcus arrives at Whitfield Tower for his shift and finds Gregory Voss waiting by the time clock with 2 members of building security standing slightly behind him, the posture of men who have been told to expect trouble and are disappointed to find none. There's been a theft reported on the 41st floor, Voss says. A laptop belonging to a senior account manager went missing sometime between Thursday night and Friday morning. You had access to that floor Thursday night. So did 4 other people on the cleaning rotation. So did anyone with a key card who worked late. You're the one with the write-up on file. Marcus feels the floor shift slightly beneath him. The particular vertigo of watching an accusation build itself out of nothing but convenience. I didn't take anybody's laptop, Mr. Voss. Security is going to need to review your bag and your locker. Marcus has never once, in 2 years, had his integrity questioned this directly. He opens his bag himself before anyone can ask twice, because he has nothing to hide and everything to lose, and a man with everything to lose learns quickly that hesitation looks exactly like guilt to people already looking for it. The bag contains a thermos, a library book, a photograph of Alicia, and a granola bar. His locker contains a spare uniform shirt and a birthday card Zoe made him in October that he has not had the heart to throw away. Security finds nothing because there is nothing to find. Voss's face tightens with the specific disappointment of a man who wanted to be right. We'll pull the floor's security footage, Voss says, as though this is a concession rather than the obvious next step that should have happened before a man's dignity was searched through in front of 2 guards. You do that, Marcus says quietly, and when it shows I never went near that office, I'd appreciate an apology in front of the same people who watched you go through my things. Voss says nothing. He does not apologize that day or the next, even after the footage confirms exactly what Marcus already knew, that the laptop had been left, forgotten, in a locked conference room by the account manager himself, who found it Tuesday morning under a stack of proposals and never once mentioned the incident again. The fourth humiliation arrives on Thursday, and it is the one that finally breaks something loose in Marcus that 2 years of quiet endurance had kept carefully sealed. He is called into the building's main lobby during his shift to help move furniture for an evening reception being hosted by Whitfield Global for a group of visiting investors. Marcus, along with 2 other maintenance workers, is asked to carry in folding chairs and arrange a temporary bar setup, work that is not officially part of his job description, but that he does without complaint, because refusing extra duties has never once, in his experience, gone well for a man in his position. While he is working, a caterer's assistant, mistaking him for kitchen staff because of his uniform, hands him a tray and tells him to begin serving hors d'oeuvres to arriving guests. Marcus, not wanting to cause a scene during a company event, takes the tray and begins circulating, offering small plates to investors in expensive suits who barely glance at him. One investor, a heavyset man named Preston Cole, the same Cole whose account team had watched silently the week before, stops Marcus mid-stride. "You," Cole says, snapping his fingers twice, the exact gesture a man uses for a dog rather than a person. "Get me a scotch." "Neat. I'm not with catering, sir." "I can find someone who is." Cole laughs, not kindly, and turns to the man beside him. "They really do hire anybody off the street these days, don't they?" The room does not go silent, because rooms like that rarely do for a man like Marcus, but a few heads turn. A few conversations pause just long enough for Marcus to feel the full weight of 40 pairs of eyes deciding, in the space of 2 seconds, exactly what kind of man he must be to be standing there. Marcus sets the tray down carefully on the nearest table. "I'll get someone from catering to bring your scotch," he says, his voice even, though something behind his ribs is burning. "But I'd ask you not to snap your fingers at me again." Cole's eyebrows lift, more amused than offended, the specific amusement of a man who has never once in his life been told no by someone who cleans his office. "Excuse me? I said I'd ask you not to snap your fingers at me. I have a name. It's on my chest, if you'd care to read it, instead of looking past it." Gregory Voss arrives within 90 seconds, summoned by a nervous catering manager who saw the exchange and panicked. Reeves. Outside, now. In the hallway, Voss does not raise his voice, which is somehow worse. "You just insulted a man whose firm manages $400 million in assets with this company. He snapped his fingers at me like I was a dog, Mr. Voss. He's a client. I'm a person. Not tonight, you're not. Tonight you're an employee of Whitfield Global Enterprises, and your job is to make this building's guests comfortable, not to lecture them on manners." Marcus stands very still, his hands curling into fists at his sides that he does not raise, because he has a daughter at home who needs a father with a job in the morning more than she needs a father who lost his temper the night before. "Understood," he says again, the same word he has said 3 times in 1 week, a word that is starting to taste like ash in his mouth. "You're suspended for the remainder of the week, unpaid, pending review," Voss says. "Consider yourself lucky it isn't worse." Marcus does the math on the walk to the bus stop. 3 days unpaid means $162 he will not be earning, against a rent payment that is already 4 days late, against a landlord who has already slid a written notice under his door once this month. He calls Curtis Boone from the bus stop, standing in the cold, and asks for 1 more week. "I've given you extensions before, Marcus," Boone says. "I run a business, not a charity, I know. I'm asking anyway. I've never missed a payment in 2 years until this month." 1 week, Boone says finally. "After that, I start the paperwork." Marcus rides the bus home in silence, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. A man who fed a stranger a sandwich 7 days earlier and has been punished for it, in one form or another, almost every day since. What he does not know, standing at that bus stop with $162 less than he needs and a landlord's patience running out, is that 40 floors above the lobby where Preston Cole snapped his fingers at him, Richard Whitfield had watched that exchange too, on a delayed security feed reviewed the following morning, and had said only 4 words to Denise Okafor before closing his laptop. Get me the file. During his 3 days of unpaid suspension, a fifth blow lands, and this one has nothing to do with Whitfield Tower at all. Zoe wakes on Saturday morning wheezing, her small chest working hard against an asthma attack that has been building for 2 days without Marcus noticing. Distracted as he was by rent calculations and a suspension, he had not yet found the words to explain to a 7-year-old. He carries her the 6 blocks to Grady Memorial's emergency entrance because calling an ambulance means a bill he cannot pay, arriving breathless himself, Zoe's small hand gripping his collar. The intake nurse, a tired-looking woman working a double shift, takes one look at Marcus's uniform, still creased from 3 days of being unable to afford dry cleaning, and asks for insurance information before she asks about his daughter's symptoms. She can't breathe right, Marcus says. Please, look at her first. Sir, one needs your insurance card or a form of payment on file before intake can proceed to registration. I have insurance through my employer. I don't have the card memorized. Can somebody please look at my daughter while I find the number? A different nurse, younger, sees Zoe's lips beginning to take on a faint blue tinge and does not wait for paperwork, pulling a wheelchair over and calling for a respiratory tech before the first nurse finishes her sentence. Marcus follows, his heart hammering, filling out insurance forms with shaking hands in a hallway chair, while somewhere behind a curtain, his daughter receives a breathing treatment that finally, after 22 agonizing minutes, brings her wheezing under control. The attending physician, a kind-eyed man named Dr. Osei, finds Marcus afterward and speaks to him gently. She's stable. It was a moderate attack, but we caught it in time. Has she been using her rescue inhaler regularly? Her prescription ran out 2 weeks ago. I couldn't cover the refill and rent in the same month. I was going to get it as soon as I got paid again. Dr. Osei does not lecture him. He simply writes a new prescription, quietly flags Zoe's file for the hospital's patient assistance program, and tells Marcus, with more compassion than Marcus has received from most people in a suit that month, "You did the right thing bringing her in. Don't let pride or paperwork stop you next time. Her life is worth more than a bill." Marcus carries Zoe home that evening, her breathing steady again, and sits beside her bed long after she falls asleep, thinking about how close he had come, in the space of 1 bad week, to losing every safety net he had spent 2 years quietly building. He thinks about the $10 he handed Deborah Kessler at the reading breakfast, the 3 days of pay he lost defending his own name against a man who snapped his fingers at him like he was furniture, and the medication he could not afford 2 weeks earlier. He does not regret feeding Walter Higgins, not for 1 second, but he allows himself, for the first time since Alicia died, to wonder whether kindness alone was ever going to be enough to keep his daughter safe in a world built to punish men who had nothing left to spare. It is that same week, unbeknownst to Marcus, that Richard Whitfield finishes reviewing Gregory Voss's complete disciplinary file, cross-referenced against building security footage spanning the better part of a year. He watches, in a single sitting that stretches past midnight, dozens of small cruelties Marcus never mentioned to anyone. A delivery worker denied restroom access and forced to leave without completing a delivery. An elderly tenant's daughter humiliated in the lobby for asking a maintenance question during business hours, and 3 different janitorial staff written up in the same month for offenses that, on closer review, amounted to nothing more than being seen resting during an unpaid break. Richard closes the file at 1:14 in the morning and sits alone in his office for a long while before finally calling Denise Okafor's cell phone, waking her to say only, "Schedule Voss's termination meeting for first thing Monday." And find Marcus Reeves. I want to see him the moment his suspension ends. Marcus's suspension ends on a Monday, and when he returns to Whitfield Tower to clock in, Denise Okafor is waiting for him by the employee entrance instead of Gregory Voss. "Mr. Reeves," she says, "Mr. Whitfield would like to see you." "Mr. Whitfield who?" "Richard Whitfield, the CEO." Marcus stands very still, the same stillness he learned 2 years ago in a hospital hallway when a doctor asked him to sit down before delivering news that changed his life. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Denise says, and something in her expression, careful and unreadable, tells him this is not a disciplinary meeting, though it takes him the entire elevator ride to the 52nd floor to fully believe it. Richard Whitfield's office is larger than Marcus's entire apartment. The windows stretch floor to ceiling, framing a view of Atlanta that Marcus has cleaned the reflection of 1,000 times from the outside of that very glass without ever once standing on the other side of it. Richard rises from behind his desk when Marcus enters, which surprises him more than anything else that has happened in the last 2 weeks, because men like Richard Whitfield do not usually stand for men like Marcus Reeves. "Mr. Reeves, thank you for coming up. You could have called me down to your office and I'd have come just the same, sir." Richard almost smiles. "I know. That's part of why I asked you here instead." He gestures to a chair. "Please sit." Marcus sits carefully, aware of his uniform, his cracked work boots, the way the leather chair beneath him probably cost more than his entire month's rent. "2 weeks ago," Richard says, "you gave your lunch to an elderly man in the break room on the 40th floor. Yes, sir, you were written up for it. Suspended, unpaid, days later after an incident with one of our investors. I was defending myself, sir. I didn't start that, I know. I reviewed the footage, all of it." Richard leans forward. "I also reviewed 11 years of disciplinary records under Gregory Voss's supervision, 43 write-ups, 6 terminations, 4 of which were later found, in exit interviews we never followed up on properly, to be retaliatory. A turnover rate in facilities twice the company average, and in the middle of that record, one entry that stood out from every other page in the file." "What entry is that, sir?" "Yours. An employee who, according to every supervisor note before Voss took over your file, has never missed a shift in 2 years, has been commended twice by tenants for going out of his way to help elderly visitors navigate the building, and who, given the opportunity to walk past a hungry stranger like 40 other people in that room did, chose instead to give away the only food he had." Marcus does not know what to say to that, so he says nothing, and Richard Whitfield, a man used to filling silences with instructions, allows this one to sit for a moment before continuing. "I want to ask you something, Mr. Reeves, and I want an honest answer. Why did you help him?" Marcus considers the question carefully before answering, the way a man does when he suspects the answer matters more than the person asking realizes. "Because nobody in that room was going to. And because my wife used to say, the measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching, it's what he does when he thinks nobody important is." Richard is quiet for a long moment. "Your wife sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was. She passed 2 years ago, I'm sorry." "Thank you, sir." Richard stands and walks to the window, his back to Marcus, looking out over the city the way a man looks at something he owns and still does not fully understand. "The man you fed," he says finally. "His name is Walter Higgins. Do you know who he is?" "No, sir. Just an old man who was cold and hungry. 41 years ago, my father was a 22-year-old welder with a small metal shop and $800 of debt standing between success and bankruptcy. A stranger loaned him that money with nothing but a handshake because my father was too proud and too broke to ask his own family. That loan kept the shop open. That shop became Whitfield Fabrication. Whitfield Fabrication eventually became Whitfield Global Enterprises." Richard turns back to face him. "My father spent the rest of his life trying to find that man to repay him and thank him properly. He died 4 years ago without ever finding him. I have spent, off and on, considerable money trying to finish what my father started. Walter Higgins disappeared from every record I could locate, until 2 weeks ago, when a security camera on the 40th floor of my own building showed him sitting across from a janitor eating a sandwich." Marcus feels the room tilt slightly. "The old man I fed, he's the same man who kept this company from dying in its crib, yes." Richard's voice thickens slightly. "You fed the reason I have a company to run at all, Mr. Reeves, and you did it without knowing a single thing about who he was or what he was worth to me. You did it because he was hungry." Marcus sits with that for a long moment, the enormity of coincidence and consequence settling over him slowly, like weather. "Is he all right, Mr. Higgins?" "He is now. My team located him 2 days after that footage. He'd been living out of a shelter on the west side for the better part of a year, after losing his apartment to a rent increase he couldn't cover on a fixed income. He's staying at my guest house currently." refusing, so far, every attempt I've made to simply hand him money, which he insists on calling charity, though I've explained to him at length that it is, in fact, an overdue debt with 41 years of interest attached. For the first time in the conversation, Marcus laughs, quiet and surprised. Sounds like a stubborn man, he is. He also asked me 3 days ago whatever became of the young man who fed him without knowing his name. I told him I intended to find out. Richard returns to his desk and sits, folding his hands. Mr. Reeves, I am not in the business of handing out charity either. And I suspect, from everything I have read in your file and heard in this conversation, that you would refuse it just as firmly as Walter Higgins has refused mine. So I am not going to offer you money. Marcus's stomach tightened slightly, unsure where this is heading. I am going to offer you a position, Richard continues. Whitfield Global is opening a new division this year, a tenant and community relations department, built specifically to make sure the people who work inside our buildings and the people who pass through them are treated the way you treated Walter Higgins that afternoon, whether anyone important is watching or not. I need someone to help build it from the ground up, someone who understands, in a way most of my executives never will, what it costs a person to be overlooked. Sir, one don't have a business degree. I barely finished 2 years of community college before I had to stop and work full-time. I didn't ask about your degree. I asked whether you'd be willing to learn. There will be a structured training program, evening courses the company will pay for, and a starting salary of $58,000 a year, with full benefits, effective immediately. Marcus's ears ring slightly at the number, more than 4 times what he currently earns, more money than he has ever imagined attached to his own name on a single line of a contract. Sir, one don't know what to say. Say yes, if it's what you want, and say no, honestly, if it isn't. I don't want gratitude clouding your judgment. I want the man who fed a stranger without needing an audience. Then yes, Marcus says. Yes, sir. Absolutely yes. Richard extends his hand across the desk, and Marcus shakes it, aware that his own palm is still slightly rough from a mop handle he has gripped for 2 years, 6 nights a week, to keep a roof over his daughter's head. One more thing, Richard says as Marcus rises to leave. Gregory Voss's employment with this company has been terminated, effective this morning, following a full review of his disciplinary history. 4 of the 6 terminations under his supervision are being formally reversed and offered reinstatement with back pay. I do not tolerate cruelty dressed up as management, Mr. Reeves, and I am ashamed it took me this long to look closely enough to see it happening inside my own building. Marcus nods slowly, thinking of the write-up folded and forgotten in a kitchen drawer at home, of the 2 guards searching his bag, of Preston Cole snapping his fingers like Marcus was something less than a man. Thank you for looking, sir. Thank you for giving me a reason to. The weeks that follow move faster than any period of Marcus's life since Alicia's diagnosis, though this time the speed carries him forward instead of pulling him under. He trades his gray uniform for a business-casual wardrobe purchased, over Richard's mild objection, entirely with his own first paycheck, because Marcus Reeves has never once in his adult life accepted something he had not earned, and he does not intend to start, now that earning it is finally possible. His new supervisor, a patient operations director named Renata Vaughn, walks him through spreadsheets, tenant satisfaction metrics, and community outreach budgeting with the kind of clear, respectful instruction Marcus has rarely been offered by anyone above him in a workplace. He stays late most nights, not because anyone requires it, but because he has spent 2 years wanting exactly this kind of chance and refuses to waste a single hour of it. Zoe notices the change before she understands it. Her father is home some evenings before her bedtime now, for the first time in 2 years. He helps with homework at the kitchen table, instead of falling asleep in his uniform on the couch. When she asks him one night in April why everything feels different, he tells her the truth in words small enough for a 7-year-old to hold on to. I helped somebody who needed it, he says, and it turned out that kindness doesn't disappear once you give it away. Sometimes it just goes out looking for its way back to you. Not everyone at Whitfield Global welcomes Marcus's rise with open arms. A senior manager in the new division, a woman named Priscilla Danvers, has worked at the company for 9 years, and had quietly expected to be named head of the Tenant and Community Relations Department herself, given her tenure and her degree from a well-regarded business school, when Renata Vaughn instead assigns Marcus to co-lead the department's Community Partnership Pilot Program, a project with direct visibility to Richard Whitfield himself. Priscilla's professional disappointment curdles over the following weeks into something closer to resentment. She is careful about it at first, a comment here, a slight roll of the eyes there, a habit of addressing questions about the pilot program to anyone in the room except Marcus, even when he is the one who authored the proposal. Renata notices and privately warns Priscilla once to keep the collaboration professional. Priscilla apologizes, and, for a while, the friction seems to settle. It resurfaces 3 weeks later, the night before Marcus is scheduled to present the pilot program's first quarter results to the executive board, a presentation that will determine whether the department receives full annual funding or gets quietly folded back into general operations. Marcus stays until nearly midnight finalizing the numbers, saves the file to the shared department drive, and goes home to relieve the babysitter watching Zoe. The next morning, the file will not open. Half the financial projections have been deleted, replaced with placeholder text and, in one section, numbers that do not match anything Marcus prepared, numbers that make the pilot program's cost efficiency look dramatically worse than reality. The access log shows the file was last modified at 11:47 the previous night, 40 minutes after Marcus left the building, under a login that traces back to Priscilla Danvers's credentials. Marcus discovers the corrupted file at 7:40 in the morning, 2 hours before the board presentation, and for a moment his entire body goes cold with a panic he has not felt since the night Alicia's oncologist called with test results neither of them wanted to hear. He calls Renata immediately. The projections are gone. Somebody edited the file last night. Can you rebuild it in time? Not the whole thing, not the way it needs to look for the board. Renata arrives at the office within 20 minutes, along with the IT department's access logs, which she requests the moment Marcus explains what he found. The logs confirm the modification time, the login credentials used, and, more damning still, a second file, an earlier backup, still intact in Priscilla Danvers's personal drafts folder from 3 days prior, containing the original accurate figures alongside a note to herself that reads, "If this fails, it fails on his name, not mine." Renata's face hardens as she reads it. "This isn't a mistake." "No," Marcus says quietly. "It isn't." Priscilla is called into Renata's office an hour before the board meeting is scheduled to begin. She denies everything at first, insisting someone must have accessed her account, until Renata slides the printed backup file across the desk, the one containing both the original figures and Priscilla's own note. The room goes very quiet. "I worked 9 years for this company," Priscilla finally says, her composure cracking. 9 years, and they hand a department I should have led to a man who was mopping floors 2 months ago. "He didn't take anything from you," Renata says. "Richard Whitfield gave him a chance because of who he already was, not who he pretended to be. That's the part you're missing, Priscilla. Nobody handed Marcus anything he didn't earn twice over before he ever sat down at that desk." Priscilla is escorted from the building within the hour, her employment terminated for falsification of company records and attempted professional sabotage, a termination Richard Whitfield personally reviews and approves before lunch. But the board meeting is still in 90 minutes, and the presentation is still, in large part, ruined. Marcus sits at his desk with the corrupted file open on one screen and a blank document open on the other, his hands shaking slightly, not from fear of Priscilla's sabotage succeeding, but from the sheer weight of how much rested on the next 90 minutes. He thinks of Zoe. He thinks of the pilot program, 3 months of work, dozens of tenant interviews, a community partnership with 2 local shelters that had already begun placing formerly homeless residents into stable housing with company support. He thinks of Walter Higgins, whose story had quietly become the reason the department existed at all. He does not rebuild the deleted spreadsheet. There is no time. Instead, he closes his laptop, walks into the boardroom 9 minutes before the meeting begins, and speaks with nothing but a single printed page of raw numbers Renata managed to salvage from a partial backup, and his own memory of every figure he had spent 3 months learning by heart. The boardroom is full when he enters. 12 executives. Richard Whitfield at the head of the table. Preston Cole, the same investor who once snapped his fingers at him across a catering tray, seated near the far end, present as an advisory board member for the quarter. Mr. Reeves, Richard says, "Whenever you're ready." Marcus sets down his single page of notes and begins without slides, without polish, speaking the way he has spoken his entire life, plainly, honestly, and without apology for either. 3 months ago, this company created a department most of you were told was a public relations gesture, he says. I want to tell you what it's actually become. 41 families connected to permanent housing through our shelter partnerships. 12 of them include a parent working full-time and still qualifying for housing assistance, the exact situation I was in 8 weeks ago. Employee retention in the buildings where we've piloted the community respect training is up 19%. Tenant complaint calls are down 31%. And this morning, someone inside this company deleted the spreadsheet that would have shown you every one of those numbers in a chart, because they were afraid of what it would mean if a program built on decency actually worked. The room is silent. Preston Cole leans forward slightly, his earlier dismissiveness nowhere visible on his face now. I don't have the chart, Marcus continues. I have the truth, and I have 3 months of receipts to back every number I just gave you, receipts I'll have rebuilt and on your desks by tomorrow morning. What I'm asking this board to fund isn't charity, it's the discovery that when you treat the people inside your buildings, the tenants, the staff, the strangers who wander in off the street looking for a moment of warmth, like they matter, the numbers get better. Not eventually, immediately, for 3 full seconds, nobody speaks. Then Richard Whitfield begins to applaud, and the rest of the boardroom follows. The vote to fully fund the Tenant and Community Relations Department for the following fiscal year passes unanimously 12-0, with a budget increase of 40% above the original pilot proposal. Preston Cole approaches Marcus afterward, extends his hand and says quietly enough that only Marcus hears it, I owe you an apology from a few months back. I hope you'll accept it. I will, Marcus says. Everybody deserves the chance to be better than their worst moment. By the end of that week, word of Priscilla Danvers's termination and the reason behind it moves quietly through the building, alongside word of Marcus's presentation. Nobody at Whitfield Global looks at him the way Preston Cole once did in the lobby, snapping his fingers over a tray of hors d'oeuvres. Something in the culture of the building itself, slowly and without any formal announcement, begins to shift. 6 months later, Marcus Reeves stands at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Alicia Reeves Family Resource Center, a community space built on the ground floor of Whitfield Tower, funded entirely through the Tenant and Community Relations Department he helped build from nothing but a single sandwich and a decision to look at a stranger nobody else would. The center offers free after-school tutoring, a food pantry stocked daily, emergency rental assistance for tenants and neighborhood families facing eviction, and a small employment training program specifically designed for people transitioning out of homelessness. In its first 6 months of operation, the center has helped 94 families avoid eviction, connected 61 people to stable employment, and distributed food assistance to more than 1,100 households across the surrounding neighborhood. Zoe, now 8, cuts the ribbon alongside her father, wearing a new dress that Marcus bought, without checking his account balance twice first, a small freedom he still has not fully gotten used to affording. Walter Higgins stands beside them, 82 years old now, healthier, steadier on his feet, having spent the last 6 months, not as a charity case in Richard Whitfield's guest house, but as a part-time mentor at the very resource center Marcus helped build, teaching basic financial literacy classes to residents who remind him, he says often, of the frightened 22-year-old welder he once helped without expecting anything back. I loaned a man $800 41 years ago because he looked like he needed someone to believe in him, Walter says during the ceremony. his voice carrying clearly across the small crowd. "I never imagined that Det would come back around wearing a janitor's uniform and a heart bigger than this whole building. Marcus Reeves didn't know who I was when he fed me." That's exactly why it mattered. Richard Whitfield, standing nearby, has grown close to Marcus over the 6 months since that first meeting in his office. A friendship built less on hierarchy now, and more on a shared understanding neither man says out loud but both clearly feel, that some debts are not measured in dollars, and some repayments take longer than a single lifetime to arrive. Gregory Voss, meanwhile, has not found comparable footing. His termination followed him into an industry small enough that reference checks travel fast, and 8 months after his dismissal, he remains without steady employment, working occasional temp contracts in facilities management for companies considerably smaller than Whitfield Global. Preston Cole's firm, meanwhile, has become one of the Tenant and Community Relations Department's most consistent financial sponsors, a partnership Cole personally championed to the surprise of colleagues who remembered the man he used to be in that lobby. Priscilla Danvers filed a wrongful termination claim 3 months after her dismissal, a claim that collapsed once her own falsified file and self-incriminating note were entered into evidence. She has since relocated to another state and, according to the last update Renata Vaughn received, works in an unrelated industry entirely. Deborah Kessler, the PTA coordinator who charged Marcus a donation fee at the father-daughter breakfast and offered no thanks for it, saw her comment about the maintenance staff repeated by another parent in a community forum post that gathered far more attention than she intended. She resigned from her volunteer coordinator role the following semester and has not returned to it since. Marcus never asked for that outcome, and when Zoe's new teacher mentioned it to him in passing, he only said, quietly, that he hoped she'd learned something worth more than the apology she never offered. Marcus was promoted again in month 5 to full director of the Tenant and Community Relations Department with a staff of 11 and an annual departmental budget of $2.1 million, funding partnerships across all 6 of Whitfield Global's regional properties. His starting salary of $58,000 has grown to $92,000, a figure that still catches in his throat sometimes when he checks his direct deposit, a number that used to feel, in the years right after Alicia's death, like something that happened only to other people's families. He moved Zoe out of the apartment above the laundromat 4 months ago into a small 3-bedroom house 11 minutes from her school, with a backyard where he built her a garden bed the first weekend they lived there, planting sunflowers, because Alicia had always loved them, and Marcus wanted his daughter to grow up watching something beautiful bloom in a yard that finally belonged to them. He kept his old gray uniform. It hangs in the back of his closet, name tag still crooked, and some mornings, getting dressed for a job he still cannot quite believe is his, he touches the fabric for a few seconds before closing the door, not out of nostalgia for the exhaustion of those years, but as a reminder of exactly who he was before anyone was watching, and exactly who he intends to remain now that everyone is. At the Resource Center's 1-year anniversary, held on a warm Saturday afternoon with music playing and children running between folding tables loaded with donated food, Richard Whitfield pulls Marcus aside near the entrance. "My father used to say something to me when I was young and didn't understand what it meant yet," Richard says. He said the truest test of a man's character isn't the moment he's given power. It's the moment before anyone thinks to give it to him at all. Richard looks out at the crowd, at Walter Higgins laughing with a group of teenagers he's mentoring, at Zoe chasing a friend between the tables, at the building that used to be nothing but Marcus's overnight shift and is now something closer to a second home. "You passed that test long before I ever knew your name, Marcus. I just happened to finally look. You looked when it counted," Marcus says. That's more than most people manage in a whole lifetime. That evening, after the crowd thins and the folding tables are stacked away, Marcus sits on the front porch of his new house, with Zoe curled against his side, the two of them watching the sun go down over a neighborhood that, for the first time in years, feels permanent. "Daddy," Zoe says, "are we rich now?" Marcus considers the question for a long moment, the way he considers most things that matter. "No, baby," he says, "we're not rich. We're taken care of. That's different, and it's better, and I want you to remember the difference for the rest of your life." "What's the difference?" "Rich is about what you have," Marcus says. Taken care of is about what you don't have to be afraid of anymore. He pulls her closer. And none of it happened because I was looking to get something back that day in the break room. It happened because your mama raised me to believe kindness doesn't need an audience to be worth giving. Don't ever forget that, Zoe. Not when we're struggling, and not now that we're not. Zoe is quiet for a moment, watching the last light fade over the rooftops. I won't forget, Daddy, she says. Reeves people work hard, and Reeves people are kind. Both, Marcus says, his voice thick. Always both. 2 years after that Tuesday afternoon in the break room, Whitfield Global Enterprises publishes its first annual Community Impact Report, a document Marcus insists on writing himself instead of handing to the corporate communications team, because he wants the numbers to read the way real life reads, plainly and without exaggeration. The report shows 218 families connected to permanent housing across all 6 regional properties, a partnership network now including 11 local shelters and 4 workforce development nonprofits, and a company-wide tenant satisfaction score that has climbed from 61% to 89% in 24 months. The report's final page carries a single photograph: Marcus, Zoe, and Walter Higgins standing together at the Resource Center's front doors on opening day, the same doors that now bear a small brass plaque reading, simply, "Dignity costs nothing." Marcus keeps his old name tag, the one that hung crooked on his uniform for 2 years because he could not afford $11 to fix the broken pin, framed on his office wall above his desk, positioned where he sees it every single morning before his first meeting begins. Visitors sometimes ask about it, assuming it is some kind of motivational decoration purchased for the room. Marcus always tells them the truth. That's not decoration, he says. That's a reminder of exactly how little separates the man behind this desk from the man who used to clean it. Walter Higgins passes away peacefully 18 months after the Resource Center opens, at the age of 83. In a small apartment Richard Whitfield helped him secure near the center, where he had spent his final year and a half teaching, mentoring, and, according to nearly everyone who knew him during that time, laughing more than he had in decades. His funeral is attended by more than 300 people, many of them residents he mentored, staff from the shelter where he once lived, and executives from a company he quietly helped build twice, 41 years apart, first with an $800 loan to a desperate young welder, and then with a single sandwich shared across a break room table with a janitor who never once asked what the debt was worth. Marcus delivers the eulogy. He keeps it short, the way Walter would have wanted it, and ends with the same line Walter said to him on the day the Resource Center opened its doors. "He didn't know who I was when he fed me," Marcus tells the room. That's exactly why it mattered. Richard Whitfield establishes the Walter Higgins Community Fellowship in the months that follow, a scholarship and mentorship program that places 20 formerly homeless individuals each year into paid job training positions across Whitfield Global's properties, with Marcus's department overseeing every placement personally. The fund's first class graduates 14 months later, 17 out of 20 participants moving into full-time employment with benefits, a completion rate that outside evaluators later call one of the strongest of its kind in the state. Gregory Voss reaches out to Marcus once, nearly a year after his termination, requesting a meeting Marcus did not have to grant, but chose to anyway. Over coffee, Voss apologizes, plainly and without excuse, for 11 years of running a department through fear instead of respect. Marcus accepts the apology without pretending the years of harm it caused simply disappear because of it. "I forgive you," he tells Voss. "Forgiveness doesn't mean I forget what it cost the people under you. It means I'm not going to let carrying anger toward you cost me anything else." He does not offer Voss a job. He does, 3 months later, write him a fair and honest reference letter when a smaller property management company calls to verify his employment history, because Marcus has learned, in the strangest and hardest way possible, that even the people who wronged him deserve the chance to become something better than their worst decade. So here is the question worth sitting with tonight. If you passed a stranger today who needed nothing more from you than to be seen, would you have done what Marcus did, knowing nobody important was watching, knowing there was nothing in it for you at all? How far would you go to protect a stranger's dignity when protecting it costs you something real? What injustice have you walked past in your own life, telling yourself it wasn't your place to stop and notice? Marcus Reeves never set out to change his own life the day he gave away his lunch. He only refused to let a hungry man sit alone in a room full of people who could afford to care and chose not to. Everything that followed, the opportunity, the friendship, the home with the sunflowers in the backyard, was never the reason he did it. It was simply what kindness, given honestly and without condition, eventually finds its way back to. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes good fathers and good people are worth rooting for. Leave a comment and tell us which moment stayed with you the longest. And the next time you see someone the world has decided not to look at, remember that the smallest thing you give away might just become the beginning of everything someone else was praying for.